How do you find something when you don't even know what it is you're looking for? How do you search for what you can't describe? Describe what's essentially invisible, but you know it's there because you can feel it. It took me 8 years to finally find this effect that I now use all the time, from artwork to photography. And today, I'm going to show you how to do it too. But here's the thing, it's almost invisible, so you really have to try this one for yourself because it just might not fully come across in the video. You can literally apply a basic version of this in under 30 seconds to artwork you've already made, so you don't even have to create anything new. You can have fun going through your entire back catalog and testing it out. And one other thing, actually, let's wait until part 2. Let's dive right in. What I'm going to do to begin this is we need to create a pixel duplicate or a merged version of the artwork that we have on screen. The easiest way to do this is to create a new layer on top of our stack. And I'm going to do a 3-finger swipe down, tap on copy all, and then do a second 3-finger swipe down and tap paste. And this will paste a merged version of all the layers of the art that we've made at the very top of our stack. You can see it right here. Now I'm going to duplicate the merged version of the art that we just created. That way we can apply the effect to this one and we'll still retain the original underneath. You'll see why that's important here in a second. So I have the top layer selected, and now what I'm going to do is go to the adjustments panel and we're going to select Gaussian blur. And now we'll just touch our screen and drag to the right, and that'll start to blur the art. What I was finding while working on this with the canvas size that I'd originally selected was I kind of liked around 6 or 7%. So you can stick with something around there, but if you've got a larger or smaller canvas, you might need to adjust the blur a little bit. And the idea is we don't want to go overboard. We don't want to blur it too much. We just want to blur a little bit to create a bit of a haze around each of the letters. I'm going to go a little bit higher than I usually would just so that it hopefully really comes across on video. But again, I'm going to stick with around 8% here. The final step in this basic version of the effect is to reduce the opacity of our layer. And that basically lets us see through it a little bit to the original crisp art that lives underneath. So I'm going to reduce it to maybe around 25%, or maybe just a little bit higher, again, just so that you can see it here on screen pretty clearly. Let's go with 30. This is completely personal preference. You add as much or as little of this blurred effect as you like. So let's stick with 30%. Let's zoom in again, and I'm going to turn it off and on just so you can hopefully catch a little bit of the before and after look. It's just got a hint of that dreamy look that the original version didn't have. Now for the second version of this effect, which I think looks even better, and I use this all the time. Let's remove the layer that we just created. This is the one with the glow. And again, I'm going to duplicate the original merged version of the art that we added here previously. And we're going to start in exactly the same way as we did before. We're going to add a Gaussian blur. So we'll tap on Gaussian blur. And maybe I'll go to 8% again, but when I was doing this off camera, I was tending to like maybe around 6 or 7%, like I mentioned before. So here's an 8% blur. And this time we're going to apply one additional effect before we start to mess around with the opacity of the layer. And that is to go into the adjustments again and apply a curves adjustment. What this is going to do is allow us to add some contrast to this blurred layer. I'm going to create what in the photography world we like to call a bit of an S-curve. So I'm going to bump up the brightness of this blurred layer, and you can really go extreme with this, because remember, we're going to reduce the opacity in a second, which is going to reduce how much of this effect is applied to the art. So you can really push this, so don't be afraid to go crazy with it. And remember, if you ultimately don't like how this looks, you can always just delete the layer and redo this again really quickly. So you can tell here I've created a lot more brightness in it. Let's take a look at what happens if I reduce the contrast. Actually, I kind of like it bright, so maybe I'll leave this roughly where it would usually be. And let's just really push the envelope with this top one. So you see, I've created a curve on this little graph where initially it was just a straight line. Now the next step, which is the same as how we ended the first version of this effect. Come back to our layers, and again, we reduce the opacity. And do you see how this time it's adding a lot more brightness and a lot more of a glow to the effect than what we initially did? So here we'll take this down. Maybe I'll go around 35, just so that it's very clear. Usually I'd go with a number maybe between 15 and 30% if I'm just doing this off camera. So now let's take a look at the before and after. See the difference? See how we've created a really magical glow around each one of the letters? and simply just by adding a blur and then increasing the contrast of that blur just a little bit. And here's where I want to mention that second thing that I alluded to a little bit ago. Remember, all we did was apply blur and then increase the contrast a bit. So while this works great in Procreate, you can also apply this in almost any other software program that you use. I initially learned how to do this in Photoshop. Obviously, we can do it in Procreate. You can do this in Affinity Photo or any number of other creative or photo editing applications. Now for the third version of this effect, we're going to use a tool that's just a little bit juicier than the one we've been using already. And that tool is the bloom adjustment, which is going to add more of a glow than the blur that we were just using. So let's just go in, and this time I'm just going to turn off the layer, and then let's add a duplicate again, and we'll move this one to the top. So remember, layer 22 is where I'm going to apply the bloom effect. So we'll dive in to the adjustments, and we're going to apply bloom. Now the key here is to play around with these adjustments at the bottom, the transition, the size, and the burn, because depending on where these are set for you, it will really influence how the effect is applied. The transition slider tends to affect which of the tones in the image will be impacted. So if I take the transition all the way down to 0, watch, it's going to really emphasize the highlights, which in this case are the areas here in the center that are brightest. So as I slide up the effect, you see how it's already starting to impact the little descender of the G. So as I push it up, you can tell it's really emphasizing the brightest areas more. As I take the transition slider and slide it up, it balances out more with the entire image. Position this where you like how it looks. I tend to like it a little bit closer, maybe to 100%, just so that it's not pushing those highlights too much. So if I change the size, you can probably tell it's making the glow a lot more dispersed or a lot blurrier than the very focus boom that shows up at the lower percentages. So I kind of like to have this a little bit hazier. So I'm gonna bump it up to, I don't know, around 40% looks good to me. And then the burn will really emphasize how intense the effect is. So if you really want to push the glow, you can bump up the burn to a higher level, or you can pull it down for a more subtle effect. So I'm going to make it a little bit more intense, again, in the hopes that this comes across on camera, but you pick what you like for your art. And remember, we are going to tone down the adjustment just a little bit with the opacity. So just like before, I'll tend to push it a little bit with the adjustment rather than go too light. So maybe, I don't know, maybe we'll go around 48%. And then we'll start playing around with these and see what we like. I like maybe around 50%. And let's go maybe around 60% looks good. And if I zoom back out again, you can tell we added a pretty intense glow here to the art. Final step is the same as before. By tapping layers, we'll apply the bloom. And then I can take the opacity down to emphasize or de-emphasize the effect as much as I want. So we'll leave it here at 61%. That looks good. And again, I'll zoom in. Let's take a look at the before and after. Pretty cool, right? And it's just a couple of simple steps to go from here all the way to here. We're going to call this last version the Glorton effect, because the original technique that all of this is based on is called the Orton effect, which is the effect that I was looking for almost a decade. So if this one is made up of glow and the Orton effect, we end up with the Glorton effect. Now, before we jump into all the bonus effects, I just want to take a second to say a huge thank you for your support. Your views, likes, and subscribes, purchases of any of the Procreate brushes or any of the other tools in my shop are what make all of this possible. And just a reminder that you can grab a bunch of free resources, including free Procreate brushes, my ultimate Blackletter guide sheets, and a ton more by joining my newsletter community at blackletterfreebies.com. Now let's get to those tips and tricks. The first one that I want to go over is that sometimes when we apply these blur or these glow effects, we can lose a little bit of that punch or that sharpness that we had in our original art. But luckily, we have an adjustment that we can apply here that will add some of that back. So here's what we're going to do in this case. I'm going to create another pixel duplicate or merged version of all of the art, including the glow this time. So remember the process for this, just 3-finger swipe down, copy all, create a new layer on top, 3-finger swipe down, paste. Now we've got a pixel duplicate of the entire work, including the glow. From here, we're going to tap on the adjustments again, and this time we're going to pick sharpen. And I'm going to zoom way in to make sure that you can clearly see how this effect works, because it can be a little bit subtle. Again, it may not come across as well on the video. To apply the sharpening, we're just going to touch the screen and drag to the right, See the little blue bar at the top here, applies more and more of it. And hopefully it's coming across. But as I drag to the right, you see our image is getting sharper and sharper. It's a good idea. Take a look at these little details here right in the middle. You can see it's getting more and more sharp. You don't want to overdo this too much because sometimes it can add some weird artifacts like little halos around your art. But in this case, it looks like a pretty strong adjustment, isn't impacting things too bad. Maybe we'll just browse around and take a quick look. That's not bad. So I'm going to go pretty intense with this. So I'm going maybe around 85. Again, totally a judgment call. Pick a value that works for the art that you're creating. And as we've done before, we can reduce the intensity of this effect by playing with the opacity of the layer. So I can go back to originally what we had. Hopefully you can tell it's really sharpening up those edges, but we're still retaining the glow of the entire artwork. So I'm going to go, I don't know, maybe around 60% looks good. Let's tap back on the screen. Maybe even worth zooming into this little flourish spot that we added with the crackle brush. You can tell it really sharpens this part up quite a bit, right? Next up, let's zoom back out again and say I just want to apply my glow effects or all of these effects that I've been working on just to the art itself. Maybe I don't want the background. For example, if I want to export a PNG image of this file, which retains the transparency of the background of this image, meaning I could overlay it onto like a shirt design or something like that, and I wouldn't have to contend with this black background. Totally easy to do this as well. All you have to do is turn off the background layer before you do that 3-finger swipe, copy all, and paste. So for example, I just turned the background layer off down here, and you'll still be able to see the black because I have it on some of the original art here. So let's turn all of this off, and now you can tell the background is invisible. We can see that Procreate background grid living here in the back. So this time, all I do, 3-finger swipe down, copy all, create another new layer on top, 3-finger swipe down, paste, and you'll see even the bounding box around the art is just limited to the art that we made. And if I look at the layer here at the top, you can tell that this little image, the little thumbnail of our artwork, now just includes the Ring of Fire circle design. From here, we can then apply the blur effect, the blur and contrast adjustment with the curves, or the third bloom version of this Orton or Glorton effect that we just created. And all those effects, let's just go through a quick example. We'll use bloom here. All of these effects will now only apply, we're gonna go super intense just so you can see it. They just apply now to the artwork and not the black background. If I bring my background back now, I still have the cool effect applied, but now it's just applied to my Ring of Fire art. For the third tip, remember that you don't have to apply just one of these effects. We could go with the original blur and then add the bloom effect to that on top. I can even turn one of these background layers on again, just so you can see what I'm talking about. That added a more intense glow. I could back off on that by adjusting that opacity. So you can keep stacking these adjustments on top of each other and create some really, really unique looks. Apply all of them, apply some of them, just one of them, whatever you want to create the look that makes you happy. And finally, last tip. For this one, I'm gonna go back to my gallery and pick a piece of art that we created a couple of tutorials ago. It's this Blackletter bee. Let's dive in. And remember our first trick, I'm just gonna go ahead and create a pixel duplicate. I might even have one already, but who knows? There we go. And we're gonna paste, 3-finger swipe, paste the pixel duplicate, and we'll create a duplicate of this one just to have it as a backup. And first, I'm actually gonna boost this just a little bit. So I'm gonna apply a quick contrast adjustment like we did with the second version of the Orton effect. Go here to the adjustments, pick curves, and let's just boost the brights. See how that makes it a little bit brighter? And this time we'll pull down the darks maybe just a smidge. It's the highly technical term there, smidge. And boost the bright just a little bit. Okay, cool. That's already added some fun drama to the effect. And now, what if I just wanted to add a little bit of that glow or that Orton effect to specific parts of this drawing? To do that, first, let's duplicate the layer that we just adjusted, and we'll do just what we did with that third version of the effect. we'll select the bloom. And this time, before starting to drag the slider, I'm going to tap up here, this little triangle. And see, it gives me two options. I can apply this effect to the entire layer, or I can just apply the effect with my pencil. So now, if I wanted to apply this bloom effect and really just kind of add some glow to specific spots, I'd probably pick the shiniest spots. Those are the ones that would be reflecting the light and maybe giving off a bit of a glow, like this one right here. What I'm gonna do is use my pencil now and just start to highlight on this spot. You see, that got pretty extreme. That's because of the settings that I have selected here. So now that I've applied it to a spot, I can start to really dial in the effect that I'm looking for. Maybe I kind of like it there. I'll increase the size a little bit, transition, kind of like where it is here, where it's more generic. Maybe we'll take the burn just down a little bit, just like that. And now I can just apply this bloom effect to those specific parts. Maybe here's a little spot over here, a little over here. Just highlight these areas with my pencil. Maybe a bit up here as well, and over here. You know what? Maybe I even increase the size of the brush, reduce the opacity a bit, lightly touch up a couple of these bright spots on the letter, just like that. And maybe one final bonus tip. Remember, when you're applying any of these effects, you can just tap on the screen and do a before and after preview by tapping on the eye on the center. You can cancel the whole thing, apply it right here, undo your last step, or start over with the adjustment by tapping on reset. So if I look at the preview before and after, you'll see that rather than apply the effect to the entire layer, in this case, it's really just pushing those spots where I applied it with my pencil. I want to hear just how much fun you have testing out this effect, so please drop a comment below if you try it out. And if you've made it this far without testing this out yourself, seriously, just go grab your iPad or whatever program you want to use and just give it a try. I promise this is a tool you want to have in your tool belt. In fact, as a bonus challenge, try looking at the thumbnail for this video and see if you can tell whether I use the Orton effect or not. I mean, heck, you can even go back through all of the old thumbnails that I've created and see if you can detect it on those too. If you found this video helpful and fun, it would mean the world to me if you like and subscribe. And you can also check out this video where I walk through a step-by-step tutorial of how to create that cool Ring of Fire design that we were playing around with before. In the meantime, keep writing, keep playing, and have an absolutely fantastic day. I'll see you next time.